including through South-South and triangular cooperation. So, on behalf of the Office of United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, what an honor to moderate today's discussion. Without further ado, I would first like to invite His Excellency Pablo Anselmo Tatamanti, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Argentina. Your Excellency, you have the floor, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In name of the Republic of Argentina and the Foreign Affairs Office, I was requested to be here specifically in this assembly. And I want to thank everyone's presence here today, everyone who's here, the officials, representatives from international organizations, and civil society for being here. And not only those that are here, those who are enjoying, of course, the rain from the window, but more than 400 people that are communicating through this event online remotely. They're channeling through remotely. And I would like to thank everyone. I would like to thank the Foreign Affairs officer here who is here with us today, Luis Felipe Lopez Calva, who has been always accompanying us from UNDP, from the regional office of the UNDP. And I would specifically want to thank our friends from UNDP for being here, for having accepted the challenge of coordinating this event, which is a focus on the challenges of mid-income countries. And I want to take this opportunity to say that we're so happy with the work that we've been doing hand in hand with UNDP throughout the years. And we hope to continue coordinating these efforts in this excellent space for support between UNDP and our countries. Our nations have the challenge of being able to incorporate Agenda 2030 to our public policies. We need more institutionalism of South-South cooperation, and the system of cooperation of UN is substantially important so that it can become an effective measure of implementation in order to achieve these sustainable goals through the execution of policies for national development. The strengthening of the UN Office for South-South Cooperation and the Committee of High Level for South-South Cooperation helps us incorporate cooperation, both South-South and triangular cooperation throughout our development efforts. Argentina, as a president of the Committee for South-South Cooperation, has taken on with conviction our efforts, our commitment to continue our efforts in this cooperation. We know that we're going through huge challenges and exponential crisis. In 2020, we saw enormous efforts of cooperation internationally, perhaps because of COVID, and the lens it placed on the challenges we faced. Unfortunately, this was a crisis that came hand in hand with the weakening of resources for cooperation, specifically focused on countries of mid-income. And categories of these countries are far and spread far in our nations. And this cooperation, the South-South cooperation, was critical. Despite the limitations, many countries made huge efforts to support underprivileged nations so they could access medication, vaccines, and bilateral cooperation so that this reality could come to pass. And crucial multilateral institutions became more prevalent, or became more visible in regards to that cooperation. And this cooperation. So in order to achieve this economic and financial stability post-pandemic, we need to continue with this cooperation. We need to strengthen institutions for cooperation, to establish debate that is focused on the development, not only focused on 2030, but 2050. Let's not trick ourselves. We need to focus on the extra burden that our countries have due to this experience. Argentina has historically supported and driven that cooperation, and it has more and more influence on the decisions that are being made by global governance. And we drive, support the inclusive cooperation, and that is manifest in the fund that Argentina has for cooperation, which is global. And today it achieves 30 years of assistance, and we have been generating more cooperation throughout southern countries. And with this commitment, we have been able to generate a state policy that transcends different governments that take on responsibilities in the nation of Argentina. Consistent with that, this last year, we have built this cooperation agency for humanitarian assistance. And we hope that through this tool that the Argentinians have, we'll be able to expand our network around the world and also amplifying the work that we're doing, the efforts we're doing. This focus and our goals are also focusing on the framework of the organization of both conferences for South-South cooperation of the UN, and we have one budgeted in Buenos Aires for, we had one in 2019. I want to highlight that it's very important for international cooperation to find innovative means to mobilize resources for development that can complement each other and not substitute each other. And the official flows of development, highlighting the prevalence of responsibilities and using this as a cross-cutting measure, and focusing on the multilateral cooperation between intermediate countries without barriers between countries, with the multi-stakeholders. And we cannot create barriers. We need to overcome those huge barriers and that we see in our countries. And these challenges are the ones that we try to focus on this afternoon. We hope that this exchange during the event will contribute towards creating opportunities from the challenges and have a very precise goal of not leaving anyone behind. Thank you.
Thank you very
Muchas gracias, viceministro, por compartir su perspectiva y su visión, especialmente por subrayar
in South-South and triangular cooperation, the historical milestone of BAPA Plus 40 outcome document does emphasize the multi-stakeholder approach and mobilizing resources and mutual support among developing countries, also in partnership with triangular cooperation partners and without barriers. And we hope that vision can be followed up through concrete actions. And thank you very much for your remarks. Now I have the honor to invite remarks by His Excellency Cesar Landa, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Peru, to give us the opening remarks. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Muy buenas tardes con todos y con todas. Señor viceministro.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Pablo Anselmo and the Director for Latin America of UNDP, Mr. Luis Felipe López Calva. Mrs. Shingred Grace, ladies and gentlemen, and I really want to thank the organizers of this event, and I want to share some thoughts regarding countries, middle income countries, and what our goals are for development in this framework, this complex framework to achieve sustainable goals. We also see the historic barriers such as health and education and the impact of global crisis that have exacerbated the inequality in our region. Many of the countries in our Latin American region have overcome the middle income threshold and maybe could be considered more sustainable. However, we still see gaps in income and certain vulnerabilities when we talk about funding and financing itself, the effects of climate change and natural disasters. These challenges are very specific in regards to development. We need to approach them through multi-dimensional approaches and more than just looking at the GDP and other macroeconomic factors that don't really shed true light on all of these complex issues. It's fundamental to assure that the achievements that will be seen can be sustainable throughout time, and these need to be accompanied by the UN system, the international financing systems and regional systems, and the countries that donate, but in the framework to achieve a constitution for the earth, which is to reevaluate well-being and human development, sustainable development in the Southern Hemisphere. All of this is happening in order to make sure that investment is strategic, that can create potential for growth and inclusive growth and consider the most vulnerable populations. On the other hand, we also need to value the role of our countries as reference for cooperation. We need to assume an active role for development in the agenda, and we always will offer our capabilities as a country for the South-South cooperation. And there are countries like Peru that has donated 2.4 million vaccines to Ecuador. So this kind of cooperation, and we believe that it needs to be pragmatic, flexible, less radical. We need to have cross-cutting mechanisms to mobilize all the funding sources and participation and more actors for development. We also need to be capable to focus on the contribution that each country can offer for development, for social and human development. This also goes hand in hand with the fact that the 0.7% of the GDP needs to be focused on the development systems, and we also commit to developing with other countries holistically and individually according to their income levels. And Peru commits entirely to continue helping and supporting hand in hand, supporting countries of middle income through international cooperation in a circular, inclusive fashion with a multidimensional focus through the 2030 agenda, and will not leave anyone behind and guarantee human rights of each and every individual. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your very clear perspective on the challenges and especially when it comes to multidimensional way of assessing development cooperation. And we hear clearly a lot that you call on the UN system and international financing institutions to accompany this process. The UNSG has also recently emphasized repeatedly about a inclusive and connected multilateralism. Strengthening institutionally the multilateral system is key to support countries to advance. So now I have actually the honor to invite Mr. Luis Felipe Lopez Cava, Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Regional Director for Latin America and Caribbean. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. If you allow me, I will deliver my remarks in English. Ambassador Pablo Tetamanti, Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Trade and Worship of Argentina. Thank you for being here.
Gracias por estar aquí, Su Excelencia, el ministro de Argentina de Relaciones Exteriores y el ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Perú y mis amigos, los de cooperación Sur-Sur, Javier Shu, que vendrá aquí más tarde. Y
Director of the Bureau for Policy and Program Support at UNDP, and all our guests, distinguished delegates, colleagues, friends, and all of those of you who are connected online. Thank you for joining us today to discuss the opportunities and challenges of international development cooperation for middle-income countries. And we are very thankful to the government of Argentina for the opportunity to join this effort. This is a unique scenario for cooperation, which takes place just 3 years after the report of the second high-level United Nations Conference on South Cooperation, BAPA +40, that took place in Buenos Aires. Development efforts across the world are being undermined by superimposed crises. While the crisis derived from COVID-19 pandemic lingers, food and energy prices are hiking, sparked by geopolitical tensions beyond the region's borders, are adding another level of complexity to an already sluggish recovery. On top of this, climate change continues to pose increased threats to the region's economies and societies. Overcoming these challenges requires more and different ways of cooperation. In the past years, non-traditional cooperation modalities have assumed increased importance, particularly South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation, consolidating their role as innovative cooperation modalities, contributing to the global and regional development efforts, and a relevant tool for Agenda 2030. Although there is still some discussion on definitions and scope, the fact is that there is a very clear consensus. South-South and triangular cooperation should be seen as an expression of solidarity and cooperation among countries based on their shared experiences and objectives. Southern solutions have lifted millions of people out of poverty and hunger. Why is South-South so important as a cooperation framework? To illustrate, let us think about the traditional so-called best practice approach to cooperation. Traditionally, cooperation under that framework has looked at successful interventions, typically in developed countries, so-called best practices, and so to apply them to other countries. Through South-South cooperation, the conversation is among equals. A dialogue is established between two countries facing similar challenges, such as institutional capacity, volatility, and financial constraints. This dialogue leads to finding solutions adapted to the local context. Cooperation is better than no cooperation, of course, but South-South cooperation is even better because it allows to bypass the so-called best practice notion and moves us into what we can call the best fit approach. UNDP places South-South and triangular cooperation at the heart of its programs and operations at global, regional, and country levels. In 2021, UNDP implemented over 945 South-South cooperation projects, accounting for 7.5% of our total number of projects and 11% of our program and project expenditure. South-South cooperation also played a key role in our COVID-19 response. It is noteworthy that it accounted for about 21% of all of our COVID-19 related projects this year. Our UNDP Strategic Plan 2022-2025 clearly recognizes that South-South cooperation is an essential driver of progress towards sustainable development. There is still much to be done to scale up and improve South-South and triangular cooperation for sustainable development. The approach is about connecting more countries and finding better ways to share. And for this, UNDP offers a platform that can do just that. In the search for answers to the current multidimensional crisis, developed countries should intensify their efforts to follow BAPA plus 40 recommendations. You can count on UNDP's support to work together at the regional and global level in the adoption of an approach that promotes the use of multidimensional and vulnerability criteria and a comprehensive view of development to guide international cooperation in accordance with the 2030 agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these very important remarks. You're a strong advocate for South-South cooperation and unpacking its principles and features that really address the challenges of today, resonant with the messages we heard just last week as we celebrate the UN Day for South-South cooperation on 12th September in conjunction with the Global South-South Development Expo in Thailand. Many of you have delegates participating in that conference, and we do see multi-stakeholder participation, countries from the South and the North, emphasizing the same message we're emphasizing here. Thank you so much. So with that, indeed, we have the first panel, distinguished speakers talked about the overview, the trends, the opportunities and challenges and recommendations, and all emphasizing a more inclusive way, multidimensional way of doing development cooperation. We know cooperation is the only solution to today's challenges, yet the way we cooperate, the framework under which we cooperate are being constantly tested for its efficiency, its inclusiveness, effectiveness, and its sustainable impact. It is very necessary to leverage the great potential and address the challenges among middle-income countries and rethink our approach of engagement that promotes the use of multilateral criteria that offer a more comprehensive view of development in accordance with the Sustainable Development Agenda. So our next panel will talk about development cooperation with middle-income countries. We have a distinguished panel of speakers. Unfortunately, the first speaker in your agenda is being delayed by the beautiful rain of Manhattan. So let's move on to, we will still reserve the spot for the minister from Costa Rica to join us later when she comes. So I have the honor now to invite His Excellency. Oh, yes. We will need to rearrange the panel to have the next panel discussion. I thank you very much, ministers. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me cordially invite the speakers for the next panel to come to the stage. We will have, His Excellency, Mr. Farooq Iqbal Khan, Ambassador Director General for International Multilateral Affairs of Pakistan, as chairmanship of the G77 and China. Sir, welcome to the panel. Thank you. We will also have His Excellency, Mr. Anjis Alament, Ibero-American Secretary General on the stage. Thank you very much. Yes, we have, okay, we will rearrange the speaking order. Now, for this panel, as I introduced, we will talk about development cooperation with middle-income countries. And first, let us invite remarks by His Excellency, Mr. Farooq Iqbal Khan, Ambassador, Director General. The floor is yours.
That was pretty quick. Thank you. First, thank you for inviting Pakistan for this conversation, and thank you for your moderation. I'll make a couple of points just to reflect. When we look at the world today, we are facing at least three kinds of crises, which are mutually reinforcing one another. One is the economic shocks that are resulting from the pandemic. The second is the geopolitical crisis, the war in Ukraine, which is impacting in many ways, and I'll explain. And the third is the climate crisis. So if you look at these three pictures, you will find a common thread which is reinforcing impact on the middle income and developing countries with these three. I mean, COVID-19 disrupted not only agriculture, but supply chain, it enlarged poverty in many ways, escalated commodity pricing, eroded the capacity of millions of people in the vulnerable countries like ours, in middle income, low middle income countries, to pay for their food. Now comes war in Ukraine, and this has further disrupted the same food supply chains, as well as the price of energy. And all this is leading to, is impacting a very large swath of population in the developing countries. And we can only imagine the situation in more vulnerable countries or more vulnerable countries like Afghanistan or in those in sub-Saharan Africa, the kind of situation that they may be faring. And then comes climate change, which is further exacerbating all these challenges that we are facing today. Just to give you a very personal example of we in Pakistan faced one of the worst floods, which the Secretary General Guterres has called climate change on steroids. The kind of floods has washed away a very sizable, and I should say maybe majority of the fields that were ripe to be harvested. So 220 million plus people will be looking for food from abroad at the same time, while the supply chains are disrupted, not only by the war, but also by the shocks that were resulting from pandemic. So developing countries like ours are on the front line of these triple crises. And then the point we wanted to make is that our kind of archaic or age-old development system is unable to respond to the challenges that the developing countries are facing. The result is that many countries like ours are excluded from, and in more than one ways, from the concessional financing windows that are available at the IMF, World Bank, or many other ways. Many middle-income countries have faced very high level of informality, inequality, multidimensional poverty, and like in Pakistan, and I'm sure in majority of other countries, you have refugees floating from different parts of the world. We have millions of Afghan refugees, and there are many other forms of refugees that are there. And of course, despite being agriculture or otherwise, developing countries, there is a dependence on food, because food is becoming short. Therefore, Pakistan agrees and convinced that perhaps a multidimensional vulnerability index has the potential to enable a more comprehensive understanding to measure the complexity of sustainable development, as well as contribute to a more useful, efficient, and effective allocation of global financial flows in a manner that is beneficial to all, and particularly the low and middle income countries. We note the progress that has been made by the high-level panel, and we deem it important that we need to explore ways to capitalize that process and its outcome from improving the provision of support for development, embedding the impact of current and future crises in bilateral multilateral cooperation. Now, while we struggle to tackle these multiple social, economic, environmental challenges, we must not forget that the pandemic is still not over. Middle-income countries' vaccination rates will remain well below advanced economies, with many countries purchasing vaccine at commercial rates. We urgently need to recognize that COVID-19 vaccine is a global public good and ensure more equitable and fair access. as at a revamp and support provided by United Nations system and development partners to developing countries is therefore urgently required. In the same vein, an overhaul of the development assistance and access to concessional finance will be required to make life more amenable to the countless of poor people living in middle and low income countries. With these words, I'll leave it to the moderator to take it further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for emphasizing that the crises are complex and reminding us that still responding to the pandemic urgent and on top of our priority agenda. Thank you very much. And I would like to now have the honor to invite Mr. Angus Alamant, Ibero-American Secretary General. Sir, you have the floor.
Bueno, thank you very much for this opportunity to give some short remarks. Anyway, I'm going to shift to Spanish so I can be absolutely on my time in terms of the remarks. Lo primero que quiero.
The first thing I want to do is thank UNDP and the Argentine government for having organized this very important event. The topics that we're discussing today are very important. In consequence, I thank the Secretary General of the Ibero-American organization for letting me highlight these topics from the General Secretariat. We have always considered cooperation as an essential aspect, and if cooperation was important before, I would say it is even more so currently and in future. It's important right now because many of the problems and issues that our countries are facing have been lagging for a while. And the challenges that we're facing today make cooperation absolutely necessary. Countries are constantly facing global issues. And for global issues, we cannot just focus on individual solutions. We need to look at global solutions and answers. And if we want to look at it globally, we need cooperation. Secondly, the Ibero-American General Secretariat has a background of more than 30 years of cooperation, specifically an innovative cooperation that's a pioneer style cooperation. And it includes 19 countries from Latin America, Spanish speaking, plus Spain, Portugal, and Andorra. And we have generated mechanisms for cooperation which are triangular and South-South cooperation. And 30 programs are being executed that are a live example of what South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation must look like or should look like. And we also have a very well-known report where we specify everything related to international cooperation, as I mentioned, in the Ibero-American framework and triangular South-South cooperation. Having said that, as was expressed by others here, we have accompanied the background debate regarding all of the topics that include mid-income countries. And there's this arbitrary idea that was only measuring GDP, this very unidimensional focus, but not considering other vulnerabilities in these countries. More than 60% of poverty around the world is found in middle income countries, is as a consequence negating and putting barriers of investment for these countries is really affecting the fight against global poverty. So the multidimensional measurement of development is truly important. As I mentioned before, from the Ibero-American Secretariat, we are totally aware, absolutely aware of the huge capability that middle income countries have to participate in cooperation schemes and activities in triangular South-South cooperation. All of the countries are in condition to cooperate. None of these countries are in a position where they don't need help, and they're also not in a position where they can't give back. So I think the solidarity between all of us and all of these nations and this social network between countries, or this social building between countries, is so important. Having said that, I want to highlight the three main challenges in regards to cooperation. Firstly, expanding the spaces for cooperation. At least in this secretariat, we have this important cooperation that we're seeing in Iberoamerica in regards to health. We have significant cooperation in environmental factors and the fight against climate change, in defending biodiversity, and many of the challenges that we see in Iberoamerica. The cooperation that is focused on specifically vulnerable populations, such as indigenous populations, Afro-descendant populations, and people with disabilities, is inferior or has inferior ranges when compared to the others that I mentioned. So there are spaces of differential cooperation that we haven't explored yet, or enough. Secondly, we have this cluster of instruments of cooperation. We're not just talking about the traditional cooperation where we just replicate, it's just linear, it's just focused on financing, but it's not reinforced. Now we're talking about mixed assistance, technical assistance, global assistance, co-funding, public-private partnerships, etc. When we look at the broad scheme of cooperation, we're seeing new instruments that need to be leveraged and taken advantage of properly. And finally, in the environment of cooperation, we're seeing new stakeholders. We're looking at cooperation that's not just country to country, government to government. Cooperation now involves civil society, colleges, universities, different organizations, institutions that really give cooperation more life, and expanding the actors as stakeholders of cooperation is really a challenge. We could have a horizontal cooperation, but it can also be more, it can be deeper with more instruments that can approach more environments, so to say, with more stakeholders involved. Finally, the world needs more, not less cooperation. We need approaches that are more expansive in order to achieve the SDG goals. And we need to focus on inclusive development with different characteristics compared to that of the past. When we talk about development, what we're considering is development that would be politically viable, socially inclusive, and environmentally responsible. As a consequence, we have a huge environment where we can still expand this larger concept of development, and not and certainly looking at solidarity as an important method for cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, for this remark, highlighting Sajib's report, Mapping South-South and Triangular Cooperation. Indeed, I recommend you to read that report. It has plenty of evidences of working with and working among middle-income countries. Thank you very much. Now, we also have the honor to have our distinguished speaker, His Excellency Christine Guillermo Fernandez, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and Worship of Costa Rica. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry to be late. Disculpas, colegas. Es un verdadero
It's truly an honor to be here with you all in this very important meeting, this parallel session, side session. I believe that the challenges of cooperation, of development between countries, middle-income countries, is a fundamental factor for development. And we need to change paradigms. We need to find new methods and avenues and change the idea of funding, which is more and more complicated for our countries because we have tax issues that make it challenging. The discussion in regards to the income levels and what is assigned to a developed or undeveloped country or country in development has been really challenging and also a waste of time for Costa Rica. The focus on GDP has implications that are exclusive. There's no way around it. And certainly, we can see that in our reality. We see that in our countries. We see it manifested all around. It's not a good tool. It's not a good instrument for measurement as a decisive means to make economic decisions of any kind. Hence, I believe the global situation really shows us that we need a governance that's focused on constant commitment in regards to sustainable development. The current crisis derived from the pandemic and the structural issues, pre-pandemic issues that represent our great challenges for our countries in development. And based on that, if you add polarization, which is multilateral with devastating effects globally and on our global economy, especially in regards to the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, I believe this makes the situation much worse. So countries that are middle income or high income, not only have we stopped receiving official help in regards to development, but a lack of access to funding. And the truth is, we need the resources, the financial resources for cooperation in order to focus on the challenges that are growing in our countries, and not only regarding the structural issues, poverty, exclusion, inequality, but the social gaps that are growing. And these challenges continue. And truly, no one is talking about climate change and our vulnerability in regards to this climate change. We're going through this terribly. We're seeing flooding. We had a tragedy last weekend. You saw what happened in Puerto Rico. We're seeing a new hurricane in the Dominican Republic. And we must invest, but we need to borrow to build infrastructure. And then 2 years later, that infrastructure is destroyed due to climate change. And we're not responsible for this, but we need to borrow again, once again. So this dynamic is making development so challenging. That step towards development continues needing this international backing and cooperation. And with the pandemic and the global economic crisis, what we're seeing is that we're moving away from the Agenda 2030 and being able to achieve those goals. And so we're also seeing well-being being affected in our countries. Costa Rica has established an ambitious initiative for an extraordinary fund fed by the strongest economies, channeled through multilateral banking systems to support not only financial building of countries in development, but also to achieve the sustainable goals and to achieve the commitments that we've already taken on. So the proposal from Costa Rica that has been discussed in the UN in funding for development focuses on the importance of access to this international funds through the loan systems in favorable margins according to the income levels of the countries without so many conditions. And now we're promoting creativity. We need to be creative. We need to be innovative. We need to find different ways of doing things because otherwise we're just not going to achieve the results that we want. Hence, we are promoting the use of the index, a poverty index, which is multidimensional, and it's showing exactly the lacks that countries are having so we can make specific decisions that are tailored to those countries and to those realities and those regions. Hence, we need to move past that tunnel vision and traditional or that traditional focus, and an alternative for measuring mid-income countries that can establish a new narrative and acknowledge the needs that countries have in international cooperation and in the search of reinterpreting development and strengthening that comprehensive development that needs to consider all of those factors, which is fundamental in this context. In an ideal funding scenario and cooperation for 2030, we would want to have one, better coordination between the different stakeholders. The financial stakeholders, those are the ones that are not responding to our requests, and improved governance of that international cooperation. And two, we believe that the financial system and the support for development needs to improve its capability to allocate funding according to the needs of each country and according to their measurement and according to the different sectors that need it. Because what we're doing is we're focusing on the transition of development or towards development. I apologize for being late once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister. These inspirational words are never too late to come to this panel.
Thank you.
Yes, and joining of other distinguished panel members, this panel has emphasized the challenges that middle-income countries encountered are multifold, and especially all of you highlighted the lack of access to sustainable and concessional financing, which is so much needed in today's world, while we still keep this urgent task the priority of responding to the pandemic. And all of you emphasized that, yes, middle-income countries have already rise up to the test to set up funds and providing support to other countries. In the meanwhile, challenges in middle-income countries also need to be addressed by collective efforts. Thank you so much for this conversation. We don't have much time for question and answer yet. We still would like to pick up maybe one round of questions if we have quick questions from the floor, and then any questions from the online platform. Yes, please, this gentleman.
I'm George Allad from delegation of Lebanon. I have a small statement in English and Spanish, if you allow me. So, Excellencias,
Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Firstly, I would like to thank the permanent mission of Argentina and the program of the UN of development for the successful organization of this event. It's a pleasure for Lebanon for being part of the like-minded countries that support mid-income countries. And thank you for inviting us to participate in the discussion regarding the challenges that our societies face. Your dear Excellencies,
is home to several middle-income countries. it has been gravely impacted by the pandemic, conflicts, climate change, affecting food security, poverty eradication, debt sustainability, health, tourism, and education. Even before COVID-19, UN agencies estimated that over 55 million people in the MENA region were undernourished. MICs are no exception to that, since many of them are food import dependent and in debt distress. This reality led Lebanon to initiate recently with a number of countries the resolution 76/264 entitled Global Food Insecurity to address the food crisis in developing countries. Excellencies, chronic political instabilities and the massive influx of refugees and displaced persons in Lebanon have undermined sustainable development. Such overwhelming challenges need to be addressed continuously to ensure an inclusive, sustainable, and resilient recovery. Lebanon renews its call to adequately elevate the impacts of food displacement on sustainable development based on the principle of shared responsibility. We welcome the ongoing work of the UN High-Level Panel on Multidimensional Vulnerability Index. We believe in the universality of such index. It is important that it covers the economic, social, and environmental vulnerabilities of developing countries. Regional commissions can play an important role in defining the different vulnerabilities of middle-income countries across the developing world. Finally, we look forward to upscaling our collaboration with the UN team to implement the recommendations of the GA Second Committee resolution on MICs, mainly the mapping exercise, assessing the UN system support for MICs, and the follow-up on the multidimensional vulnerability index. Queremos realmente que invertir en los países de renta media.
We believe that investing in middle-income countries is investing in global economy, and it's essential to reducing the trans-regional impact of the systemic crisis. Thank you.
Your comments and also for sharing Lebanon's perspective and practices for highlighting the importance of UN system and regional commissions to work on this together with member states. Actually, apart from this comment, we also received questions relevant to that. And the first question from online is to ask, yes, post-pandemic recovery is center and most important, but how can the role of middle-income countries be better leveraged in post-pandemic recovery context? And the second question from online is asking about, yes, South-South and triangular cooperation is important, but is there a mechanism for evaluating and reporting on the impact and its contribution to the post-COVID, to the pandemic response and to the overall sustainable development agenda? So these questions, I'm bringing it back to the panel. Maybe Mr. Khan, can I start from you to give some responses, especially when you're emphasizing on top of our priority and urgency list is still responding to COVID?
Well, there's a caveat to my conversation. I'm representing G77, and anyone who knows G77, it would be very difficult for me to react to this question and give any personal. I can give you some personal reflections on this. I think that there's a two-part answer to this. Fundamental of progress and how the progress is linked to cooperation. Progress is not about how much trade alone or huge industries that you are going to build in your countries. Progress, whether middle income, low income, is, in my view as an economist, is built on three things: health, education, and social justice. If you are able to instill these three very fundamental areas in your countries, progress will come about. Those industries that we are looking for will come about. Now, middle income countries have a lot to cooperate on these areas. Health, why? Because we learned that none of or at least a vast majority of the developing countries were unable to even produce a vaccine. Education, why? Because the research and development that is needed to make progress was not forthcoming. That cooperation is needed amongst middle-income countries or low-middle-income countries. And if we cooperate at this very fundamental level, I think we would be able to forge a pathway to post-pandemic recovery, not just by sharing ideals of perhaps how we can adapt in artificial intelligence or otherwise. I think progress is about something very fundamental. It's health, education, and social justice.
Thank you very much. So can we just go along this order? Yes, Your Excellency, please.
Muchas gracias. Totalmente.
I'm absolutely in agreement with His Excellency. We cannot neglect these elements if we want a more sustainable development. And Mr. Khan, I would like to add one more element, if I may. And there's a fundamental factor, and we don't see it in our reality, peace. Peace, which is such a substantial value. I wanted to add that to our conversation.
Desarrollo y financiamiento para los países de ingreso medio. Hemos pedido por todas las vías financiamiento para adaptabilidad en cambio climático. En París se nos ofrecieron millones de dólares. Y debo decir muy francamente que la crisis global y la guerra ha hecho que de un momento a otro aparezcan millones.
And war has really escalated the crisis. So much money has been invested in war. So there is a reality here, right? There's this comparison where we see a divisiveness that doesn't lead to real peace, especially when we talk about health, when we talk about education and inclusivity. And I think there is a relationship between all of this and peace. I don't have the perfect recipe. I don't have a specific answer for your question, but I think that when we focus nationally and if we focus territorially, I think that we need to see this as a need for development. And I think that's why GDP as a measurement of countries, graduated or not graduated, is unjust. And it's not representative, because then you see that poverty continues. In our countries, we still have poverty, and with the pandemic, it was exacerbated, and economic pressure is worse. And so we see how interesting these comparisons are. It's not the same to see the development of a country in the rural area of a country versus cities, specifically as we see, poor areas and rural areas. So thank you. So I have two comments. First, I want to thank the comments by the representative of Lebanon. I think his comments were very important. It showed that the issue of middle income countries is a difficult situation, not only in Latin America, but globally, where we've seen perhaps the exception of Uruguay and Chile and perhaps others that have already reached the middle income categories. And secondly, when we discuss the other comments heard by the members of the panel, one might think that in terms of support and help towards development, the challenges of development are endogenous, and countries need to do things for themselves, but they're also exogenous. What other countries do that have an impact one way or other in the development of that other country. So lots has to do with trade, with investment, and with reducing protectionism. These are very important mechanisms in the moment when we're triggering development. As we've discussed, there are other series of fields where cooperation can certainly help development, such as exchange of experiences, as we've discussed, education, health, social policies. And I would go beyond that and say governance. Governance is an element truly fundamental for development. And assuming that countries have to do their own homework, we also have to see that externally we can look in and say, okay, this has to be a two-way street. We need to stop with protectionism and protect just investment, and also contribute to cooperation to solve these structural issues that don't allow for development to flow directly.
Thank you very much for the panel. We used very short time to address two big questions. The second question may not have been addressed this far about the mechanism of reporting on South-South and triangular cooperation. Just to share from the UN Office of South-South Cooperation, one news that the high-level political forum ministerial declaration did highlight integrating development cooperation, including South-South and triangular cooperation, into the future voluntary national reviews. And we hope from there a lot of evidence can be accumulated by countries to actually demonstrate and report on voluntarily the impact of South-South and triangular cooperation in advancing sustainable development goals. Just to add a piece of information. I know there are more questions, but I'm really sorry that as the moderator for this session, I already run out of time. Thank you very much for the distinguished panel and for the opening remark, ministers, for very inspirational discussion. Now I have the honor to invite welcome Mr. Ha Liangxu, UN Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Director for the Bureau of Policy and Program Support, who will lead the discussion of the second session. Ha Liang, please.
Thank you.
And we will also invite the panelists to the
So this is on now. Okay, great. Thank you. So the time is short. Let's get started. Hi, I see Luis Felipe just joined, and my colleague is from the NDP. And I must note that I'm sure you've noticed this is a panel flanked by the Chinese. Okay, so not by design, but it just happened. So I'm very happy to be here. And as the first session discussed the state of multilateral collaboration in middle-income countries. And this session, I guess, is going to dive a bit deeper, on how this practice, multi-stakeholder collaboration is taking place in practice, right? So, and we know that the issue is important because 70% of the world's population live in middle-income countries, right? And more than 60% of the world's population living in poverty, living in middle-income countries. And we also know that over the last 40 years, 40 plus years, international development cooperation has evolved, right? And with the changing landscape for development cooperation, the roles of developing countries, right, to collaborate among themselves, and among them clearly the middle-income countries, right? And they have achieved a level of development, but they still face a lot of challenges. They have a lot of innovation, they have a lot of solutions, but they still require support, right? So how this kind of collaboration is taking place, and so we would listen from a very distinguished panel today to continue the discussion that we started in panel 1. So without further ado, let me invite the first speaker. Let me just get my notes. So I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker, His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Mertakal, Ambassador and the Director General of the Morocco Agency for International Cooperation, to shed some light, and his thoughts on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very pleased to participate and to present the Kingdom of Morocco in this panel. I would like also to take this opportunity to thank and congratulate Argentina for taking this initiative and organizing this important event for South-South cooperation. The Kingdom of Morocco, under the leadership of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, has made South-South cooperation as one of the major pillars of foreign policy for more than 23 years. His Majesty was personally involved in order to contribute to the implementation of the Moroccan South-South cooperation framework, and these royal commitments allowed our country to develop and national ecosystem that include institutions from public sector, but also major actors from the private sector and also from the civil society. The vision that is implemented to the Kingdom of Morocco with its international partner countries on the framework of South-South cooperation concentrates the objective by targeting the citizen, the human being. So all the programs, actions, and initiatives that are implemented put the human being in the center. The Moroccan International Cooperation Agency that I'm heading now for about six years is one of the key actors of this national ecosystem that have been developed. As it was said before, we are currently facing 3 crises. Outcome of the pandemic, but also geopolitical issues due to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and also on climate change, how we said, maybe energy crisis. And in order to move forward and to include the multi-stake actors in our South-South cooperation framework with international partner countries, His Majesty launched 3 main initiatives. First was on the health sector during COVID-19, exactly in April 2020, His Majesty provided the royal donation to more than 21 African countries with whom we shared more than multiple medical products such as masks, face shields, but also medical drugs to face against COVID. So more than 10 million masks have been distributed in these initiatives. Also, a year ago, and also to allow the African continent to face the challenge of vaccination, the Kingdom of Morocco, with international partners, but also through public-private partnership that include Moroccan economic companies. We launched the building of a manufacturing vaccination plant in Morocco that will target the African continent with a competitive price for vaccine. On the second dimension for food security, that is one of the consequences of the three crises that we are facing now. It's also about how to provide fertilizers through very competitive pricing for Africa. And in order to achieve this objective, the Kingdom of Morocco, through its flagship OCP Group, which is state-owned public company, but that is one of the leading international players. We just decided to provide, starting from July and ending by the end of October, to provide about 500,000 tons of fertilizers at very competitive price, among which 1/3 of this production will be put as a donation to about, again, 20 African partner countries of the Kingdom of Morocco. So it is about a donation of 180,000 tons of fertilizer as a donation, and 360 tons that are put at a very competitive price for those partner countries. On the energy challenges, and how also, again, how we put multi-stake actors in this framework of South-South cooperation that the Kingdom of Morocco is dealing with, is also the acceleration of the flagship program that the Kingdom of Morocco and the Republic of Nigeria has launched about now 5 years ago, is really to provide this gas pipeline between Morocco and Nigeria in order to allow 13 passing border countries in West Africa countries to have access to a very affordable energy price, and of course to be very competitive. But also it will be through this gas pipeline, Europe and Southern Europe can have access to competitive gas price. So there is some few initiatives that the Kingdom of Morocco took the leadership to implement it and to contribute on this South-South cooperation framework. Now, how we can see the perspective? I think this such idea of building a South-South cooperation framework with the political will starting from the highest level of the state, but that allows the public sector, but also the private sector and civil society to get embarked in this dynamic is very important. By creating in Morocco this national ecosystem that allows all these entities to first share information, but also develop synergies, take the lead on a joint project, can also be, as I have illustrated with those initiatives, good opportunities that shows and illustrates what BAPA Plus 40 has come with in its commitments and conclusion. So we are very pleased to work with all of you and to see how we can develop all together more projects with huge impact on the ground. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Motkar. You gave some really good examples, in health sector, food, security, and energy sector, on how, multi-stakeholder practices are being, carried out. And I think the example of involvement of private sector in this across the country, I think is one of the issues we're looking at, because multi-stakeholder goes beyond the government's UN, right? Certainly includes civil society, academia, and also private sector. So I think really thank you for these examples. Next, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Nedzat Ajanovic, who is a senior executive coordinator on partnerships in the global practice and the partnerships directorate of the Islamic Development Bank. Mr. Ajanovic, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank government of Argentina, as well as UNDP and UN Office of South-South Cooperation for inviting Islamic Development Bank to this panel and to this side event. What is most important, I think, to mention is that Islamic Development Bank is the only South-South, multilateral development bank existing. And in a way, it started, out of perhaps an energy crisis, a challenge that happened in 1975. And, the South-South cooperation is in the DNA of Islamic Development Bank. What differentiates us from other 10 multilateral development banks is the fact that, we simply are the membership of the South. And also what is interesting is that the largest shareholders, such as, for example, Saudi Arabia, is not only, shareholder for the benefit of the least developed countries, but is also the recipient of support of the Islamic Development Bank. So in our membership of 57 member countries, these countries are both providing funds, but also providing or are recipients of the projects. During 40 plus years, we have designed a program called reverse linkage, which is basically very much, it's a name of Islamic Development Bank's South-South cooperation, where a country identifies a problem and looks for a solution in another member countries. So I would like to just mention 3 examples of such, example.
In 3 minutes, 3 examples.
3 minutes, okay. Yes, quickly. Suriname and Guyana, which you may be, you may not know that they are also members of Islamic Development Bank, both in South America, have looked at opportunities to bring about a better rice production. And this type of expertise is found in countries like Malaysia and in Indonesia. And what Islamic Development does is a matchmaker, in a way, finding the best opportunity or company or an entity that has that expertise, and then facilitates the transfer of technology in this rice production. Similarly, on artificial insemination, there was a feeling in Kyrgyz Republic that their animal enhancement program is not to the standard of the international level, and this expertise was found in Indonesia. Now, it's not to say that the North doesn't have that expertise, but oftentimes that expertise costs a lot more. And I would like to, since we have Director General of Morocco International Cooperation Agency here, I would like to also give an example of a solar panel production that his country has been able to obtain. And we have a lot of least developed countries in sub-Saharan Africa that need to, in a way, obtain energy from out of the grid system. And this transfer of technology from our member countries very close to the neighboring country has also been proven very successful in the energy field. So with that, I want to thank you for inviting Islamic Development Bank, and we are also open to partnership, not only on South-South cooperation, but also from North-South cooperation, and we work very closely with other North countries and technical agencies who are interested to support our membership in the South. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Janovich. I think really interesting examples. And I didn't really see IDB in that lens, in the South-South, multilateral development bank. So I think you are really adding the role of matchmaker in your words, right, to facilitate practical solutions being shared among the membership. It's really great to hear that. So let me invite now Mr. Santiago Galar, who is the National Director of the Argentine Agency for International Cooperation, as the Chairman of the United Nations Committee on South-South Cooperation, to speak. Thank you very much, Mr. Galar.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes.
And good afternoon to all, ladies and gentlemen, those who are joining us and those who are joining us remotely. I hear there are many people joining online, so much has been said already. I want to be very specific and brief in my comments since it's already 7 p.m. Firstly, in the name of the recently created agency, the Argentine Agency for Development, I thank you so much for having us. It's really important for me to for being here and representing this debate and being part of this debate. Mid-income countries have been mentioned in the global panorama with characteristics that are both public goods and global characteristics, poverty, the trading factors, the environmental factors, the prevention of disease, and so many other issues. Hence, growth and stability in middle-income countries have the capability of transmitting global benefits. And Latin America really shows strength in this regard. The traditional cooperation measures aren't sufficient, and we have consensus on the fact that we need cooperation that can effectively help us achieve the SDGs. We believe it's fundamental for the international community to join hands and make an effort to mobilize resources for development that can complement each other and not just a substitute of that cooperation north-south, and really generate more flow in cooperation. And we want to drive more cooperation, and we've discussed this in the panel, both cooperation south-south and triangular for development with differential development lines of development for academia, civil society, public partnerships in the framework of SDGs. Its added value is to combine strengths between different stakeholders with synergy, and also avoids duplicating resources or inventing the wheel. And this places more innovation, new logic in work, and creative thinking that really feeds into institutional capabilities as actors of cooperation. This agency in Argentina that has been newly created believes that facing the new challenges in the world, especially after COVID-19, we need new forms of promoting and strengthening stakeholders and non-governmental, both in design and execution that will lead to development. In this regard, it's our wish that the Cooperation Agency of Argentina will become a tool that can generate tools to articulate what the state is doing and contribute to development. And along these lines, the agency is working on a plan, a strategic plan that could enable actors and have more stakeholders that are non-governmental that will become involved within the SDGs. And we believe that partnerships with other actors and cooperation mechanisms would be very effective and interesting in regards to development. And we believe that this needs to be more actively incorporated in our agendas and definitely in international forums where we discuss cooperation and development. And this is a decisive discussion as the one we're having today. I think the world has shown that inequality has been exacerbated, and we see that more efforts and creativity is needed. Creativity is a word that we use so often and we hear so often, but I believe it's a truly current matter. We need resources and we're faced with many challenges. We need to discuss initiatives that can have more impact on people's well-being and development of communities themselves. We believe that multi-sectoral partnerships are a useful tool that can certainly support all of these incentives. I believe this is the real core of this discussion, where we need to explore these territories that are least explored, as is the case of our country. So I want to thank everyone who has been here, who has made this possible, the institutions, people behind the institutions, the Argentine mission, UNDP, everyone here who has made such an effort to bring these different stakeholders of interest to us who have shared their vision. I know it's such a really busy week, and it's been wonderful to have you all to discuss these topics that are so important, especially in South-South cooperation, where Argentina has so much interest and so much desire to continue driving. So Argentina continues working hard in cooperation and development. We are open to articulating new alternatives and brainstorming with all of you. Thank you.
For your statement, and also you gave some really important points. You made some important points, and you mentioned that we're discussing the important issue of multi-stakeholder collaboration through South-South cooperation to complement what is being done, but not to replace the traditional North-South cooperation. I think it's an important point, right? We're looking at ways to enhance this synergy. Right? So I think this, to me, is an important takeaway. And also, I think you mentioned that it's really important that after COVID, we need more, the new modalities of engagement with all stakeholders. You gave examples of Argentinian experience, of involving non-stakeholders, right, as one of the important points in your strategic plan. So I think this was reflecting some earlier, speaking points of the colleagues. So I think this again is a good point to note. And also you mentioned that the South-South cooperation can avoid the reinvention of the wheels, for example, right? So I think because their experience that can be shared, that can be utilized across the board, not to start from zero. So thank you very much, for these points. I think our, the time, to end this is 7:30, right? So I think maybe we have. Can just maybe try to summarize the discussion, and because we have also, I guess, have to set up the room, and I have been listening to the discussions earlier, and today, I think we set out to discuss the multi-stakeholder collaboration in middle-income countries through South-South cooperation. So I think in the first session, we heard, a number of really excellent, statements on how this multi-stakeholder collaboration is taking place. Right? And in the second session, we heard the reinforcement of this with more examples. Right? And I think both panels highlighted the importance of in my view the need for more attention to to cooperation for development in middle-income countries, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, 70% of the population lives in middle-income countries, and the majority of the poor, right, are in middle-income countries. So I thought it's a completing time is 7 o'clock. I was just reminded. Okay, so I should have stopped as well. And but I think what we've heard is that there are really encouraging examples. I just came back from Bangkok. Right? I was Greece, where the global South-South Expo, development expo took place. The high level of enthusiasm and the commitment and interest in South-South cooperation. So since there's no time, I will not really go into the details. I think Mr. Kala, you provided a very good summary of the discussion. In fact, and the only thing I would add, is that I don't think we spent enough time to look at the South-South the triangular cooperation together. I think we should also encourage the traditional donors to also support South-South cooperation. Right, the countries in the South has a lot of capabilities. Right, and all our countries that were presented in the last panel and this panel, almost all, have established their own, cooperation agencies. Right, so they are devoting resources to support this. IDB is a good facilitator. Right, you're acting like a quasi donor, right? So to facilitate South-South cooperation. So I think we can use more, support from the northern countries as well to drive, the South-South cooperation, so that we can have a larger scale, right, to expand the scale, the solutions and scales of the South-South cooperation. So there's really a lot of need in middle-income countries. Again, I want to repeat, there's a multitude of challenges. As middle-income countries are bearing the brunt of this impact, right, of this crisis. So really, international solidarity and support each other, complementarity, synergies, and so forth. So I think are really important, for us to work together to achieve the SDGs in the remaining, less than 7.5 years, time frame. Right? So with this, I would really thank the Argentinian mission and also the Argentinian government and our colleagues in the Latin American Bureau in the NDP to organizing this event. I understand there's a reception in this room. So no, okay, there's no time, and but anyway, so thank you very much, everyone, for participating in this important debate. Okay, thank you.